The Galactic Military Academy's first and most sacred principle, drilled into every cadet from 1,000 worlds, stated with absolute certainty that modern warfare required modern weapons. Plasma rifles, particle beams, molecular disruptors, these were the tools of civilized soldiers. Without them, you were just an unfortunate biological entity waiting to become someone else's problem. This principle had stood unchallenged for 3,000 years across 400 member species of the Coalition. Then Commander Vextor crashed on Theta Prionis IV, and a human built a stick with a sharp rock on the end. The crash itself had been spectacular in that special way that military disasters always are, where everything that could go wrong formed an orderly queue and went wrong in alphabetical order. The transport vessel Indomitable Vision, carrying 200 mixed-species soldiers to a routine patrol station, had encountered what the pilot diplomatically called unexpected gravitational anomalies and what everyone else called flying like an idiot through an asteroid field. The ship's weapon systems went offline first, followed by communications, followed by the pilot's dignity as they spiraled toward the nearest planet like a very expensive, very screaming brick. They hit hard. Theta Prionis IV, as it turned out, was one of those aggressively hostile worlds that seemed personally offended by the concept of visitors. The atmosphere was breathable, which was its only positive quality. Everything else about the planet appeared designed by a committee of sadists. The fauna was hungry, numerous, and creatively violent. The flora had thorns, poison, or both. The weather couldn't decide between oppressively hot and torrentially wet, so it chose both simultaneously. Commander Vextor, a Krellian whose exoskeleton gleamed an impressive shade of ceremonial purple, surveyed the wreckage with the expression of someone watching their career catch fire. The Krellians were an old species, proud of their military traditions, which mostly involved standing in neat formations and shooting at things from a safe distance. Vextor had graduated top of his class in strategic deployment of overwhelming firepower. He had not taken any courses in improvising with garbage on death worlds. Status report, he clicked, his mandibles creating that particular rhythm that suggested he already knew the answer would be terrible. Lieutenant Kix, an insectoid whose species name was unpronounceable, without 4 throats and a kazoo, scuttled forward. Sir, we have 203 survivors. Medical supplies are adequate. Food stores will last perhaps 6 days on rationing. The emergency beacon is broadcasting, but given our off-course trajectory, rescue may take weeks. Weapons: 17 functional plasma rifles, 23 sidearms, 4,000 rounds of conventional ammunition spread across various incompatible calibers because someone in logistics has a sense of humor. Vexthor's antenna drooped. 17 rifles for 200 soldiers on a hostile planet. Excellent. Perfect. I'm sure this will reflect wonderfully in the after-action report, assuming we survive to file one. The weapons, such as they were, got distributed to perimeter guards. Everyone else got a sharpened piece of hull plating and some encouraging words about maintaining proper military bearing. The food situation became critical almost immediately because, as it turned out, a mixed-species military unit required a mixed-species diet, and the ration packs had been stored in the section of the ship that was now scattered across 3 kilometers of jungle in bite-sized pieces. By the 3rd day, hunger had transformed from an inconvenience into a serious tactical concern. The planet's fauna made their presence known with alarming regularity. Things howled in the jungle, things with too many teeth and not enough respect for military rank. The perimeter guards with actual weapons could keep them at bay. But hunting required venturing into that nightmare forest where everything wanted to eat you, and doing it with what amounted to pointed sticks. "We need to organize hunting parties," suggested Major Threnx, an amphibious Glorthian whose skin had taken on the grey-green shade of someone who hadn't eaten properly in days. Vexthor's laugh was not an amused sound. "Hunt with what, Major? Harsh language. 17 rifles must maintain perimeter security. Send soldiers into that jungle without proper weapons, and we'll be organizing funerals, not hunting parties. So we starve while surrounded by food." Threnx gestured toward the jungle, where something large had recently made something small scream. "We wait for rescue. We maintain discipline. We do not throw away lives on futile gestures." Vexthor turned away, mandibles set in that particular configuration that meant the discussion was over. That's when Marcus Webb, who had been sitting on a piece of wreckage, doing absolutely nothing of apparent value, stood up and said, "I could probably catch something." The assembled officers turned to regard the human. Webb was utterly unremarkable by human standards, which meant he was bizarre by everyone else's. Humans had only joined the coalition 40 years ago and were still regarded with the sort of cautious interest usually reserved for exotic pets that might bite. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, and their homeworld was apparently a catalogue of things trying to kill them, which they found amusing rather than traumatic. Webb was average height for a human, with brown hair, brown eyes, and the kind of face that suggested his primary military skill was not being noticed. He wore the standard coalition uniform that fit him poorly, and he had survived the crash by being asleep in the cargo bay, which his squadmates suggested was his natural state. "You," Vexthor said slowly, "could catch something." "Probably, yeah. With what weapon, soldier?" Webb shrugged. "I'll make some." The silence that followed contained several layers of disbelief, some contempt, and from Lieutenant Kix, a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been choking. It was hard to tell with insectoids. "You'll make weapons," Vexthor repeated, his translator struggling with the concept. "From what?" "Stuff lying around." Webb gestured vaguely at the crashed ship, the jungle, and reality in general. "Wood, stone, metal, if I can find the right pieces. Basic tools, basic weapons. Nothing fancy." "Soldier, I appreciate creative thinking, but we are discussing hunting megafauna capable of tearing through hull plating. This requires precision plasma weaponry, not," Vexthor struggled for words, "not arts and crafts projects." "Sure," Webb agreed affably. "Or I could make a spear. That also works." "A spear." The word came out flat, drained of hope. "Pointy stick. You stab things with it. Been pretty reliable for, couple 100,000 years give or take." Major Threnx made a gurgling sound that was definitely laughter. "Commander, perhaps we should let the human try. What's the worst that could happen? He could be killed immediately, lowering our survival count and wasting resources on a funeral," Vexthor said. "He could also bring back food," Threnx countered. Vexthor looked at Webb, at the jungle, at his starving command, and apparently decided that watching a human do something stupid might at least be educational. "Fine, you have until nightfall. Don't get eaten." "Wouldn't dream of it, sir." Webb set about his task with the focused inefficiency of someone who had done this before, though when or why remained mysterious. He scavenged through the wreckage, collecting pieces that made sense only to him. A 2-meter length of composite material from a support strut, fragments of hull plating, some cable, a rock he found by the river that met some criteria only humans apparently understood. A crowd gathered to watch, because entertainment was scarce, and watching a human attempt to reinvent the spear was at least novel. Webb sat cross-legged and began working the rock against another rock, which seemed ridiculous until the edge began to sharpen. He worked with patient competence, pausing occasionally to test the edge against his thumb, which made the watching aliens wince. "What's he doing?" whispered a young Krellian private to Kix. "Napping. It's a primitive tool-making technique. I read about it in xenoanthropology class." Kix tilted her head, compound eyes reflecting genuine interest. His species used to do this before they discovered metallurgy, before they discovered agriculture, before they discovered fire. Actually, that's disturbing. That's humans. They spent most of their evolution being lunch for things with bigger teeth, so they got creative. The rock became a blade, crude but viciously sharp. Webb lashed it to the pole with cable, reinforced the joint with torn strips of his own undershirt for reasons that seemed important only to him, and tested the balance. The whole process took 2 hours and looked like something from a museum exhibit on primitive civilizations. He stood, hefted his creation, and grinned at the watching crowd. "Spear," he announced proudly, as if he'd just invented fusion power. "That," Vexthor said slowly, "is a sharpened rock tied to a stick. Best kind of sharpened rock tied to a stick, though. You're going to hunt with that. That's the plan, against fauna. That our sensors indicate mass between 200 and 500 kilograms. Yep, you're insane, probably." Back in a few hours, Webb turned toward the jungle, spear resting casually on his shoulder, and walked into the nightmare forest like he was going to the corner store. Vexthor watched him disappear into the foliage and wondered if he should have stopped the human. Then he wondered if stopping humans ever actually worked. Then he wondered what he'd tell the human's family if Webb became jungle food. Then he remembered humans had somehow conquered their death world, despite being made of soft meat and bad decisions, and stopped worrying. Webb, for his part, wasn't worried at all. He'd been hunting since he was 8 years old, taught by his grandfather in the Missouri woods, where things were only moderately trying to kill you. Sure, Theta Prionis IV was more aggressive than Missouri, but the principle remained the same. Move quietly, watch for signs, think like your prey, and remember that being smart beat being strong every single time. The jungle was loud with life, which was good. Loud meant you could hear things moving. Loud meant predators couldn't sneak up easily. Webb moved carefully, watching where he placed his feet, using the thick vegetation for cover. He found tracks within 20 minutes, something large and six-legged that had torn up the undergrowth. Fresh tracks. Very fresh. He followed them to a clearing where a creature built like a nightmare was eating something that had once been alive. The beast was roughly the size of a large bear, covered in scales, with a head that was mostly teeth. 6 legs meant stability and speed. The muscular tail suggested it could be used as a weapon. All in all, it was a perfectly designed killing machine that had no natural predators. It also had no concept that something might hunt it. Webb circled downwind, moving with glacial patience. Humans weren't fast, they weren't strong. But they could think 3 moves ahead, and they could throw things with terrifying accuracy, thanks to a shoulder joint that evolution had spent millions of years perfecting for exactly this purpose. The beast looked up, nostrils flaring. It smelled something but couldn't identify the threat. Webb waited, perfectly still, barely breathing. Patience was a weapon too, though not one most species understood. They wanted to charge, to overwhelm, to rely on technological superiority. Webb wanted to eat dinner. The creature went back to its meal. Webb crept closer, 10 meters now, close enough to see the individual scales. The spear was balanced perfectly, the weight distribution exactly right. He'd made hundreds of practice throws as a kid. thousands maybe, until the motion was encoded into muscle memory deeper than thought. He stood, drew back, and threw. The spear flew true, driven by physics and practice. It struck the beast behind the front left leg cluster, punching through scales and into the chest cavity, angled upward toward where Webb's brief study of alien anatomy suggested vital organs might be located. The creature roared, thrashed, and tried to flee, but the spear had done its work. The beast made it 15 meters before collapsing. Webb waited 5 minutes to make sure it was dead, then approached carefully. The creature was thoroughly deceased, killed by a rock on a stick, and some applied physics. He'd need help hauling it back to camp, but that was a good problem to have. He triggered his communicator. Webb to base, going to need a recovery team at my coordinates. Bring something to carry about 200 kilos of fresh meat. The silence that followed was profound. Say again, soldier. Vexthor's voice was careful. Killed one of those big scaled things. Too heavy to drag back alone. It's definitely dead. I checked thoroughly. You killed a Theta-class predator with a spear. That's what I just said. Yeah. More silence. Longer this time. Then quietly, almost wonderingly, we'll send a team. The recovery team arrived to find Webb sitting on the corpse, cleaning under his fingernails with a piece of stone. The creature was thoroughly dead, spear still embedded in its chest. 8 soldiers stood and stared at the impossible scene, unable to reconcile the primitive weapon with the very modern results. Major Threnks touched the spear shaft reverently. This shouldn't have worked. Worked fine from where I'm sitting, Webb said. But it's just a sharpened rock. Sharpened rocks have been killing things efficiently since before we invented language. They've got a pretty solid track record. They hauled the beast back to camp in pieces, and the smell of cooking meat transformed the entire compound's mood. Soldiers who had been hollow-eyed and listless suddenly remembered they were alive. The human had hunted with a primitive weapon and succeeded. The impossible had become dinner. Webb found himself surrounded by soldiers asking questions. Could they make spears too? Would he teach them? How long did it take to learn? He answered patiently while eating a chunk of roasted meat that tasted like victory and poor life choices by the creature. By evening, 15 more spears had been constructed under Webb's amused supervision. Some were elegant, others were disasters, but all were functional. The soldiers treated their new weapons with the careful respect usually reserved for plasma rifles, which Webb found hilarious but didn't mention. I want to try hunting, Threnks announced, holding his spear like it might explode. Sure, Webb said. Basic rules. Move quiet, stay downwind, wait for your shot. Don't try to fight fair because fighting fair is for idiots. Use terrain, use surprise, use your brain. The animal's faster and stronger, so be smarter. That's it. That's your entire tactical doctrine. For hunting, yeah, pretty much. Don't overthink it. The next morning, Threnks and Webb went out together, along with a Drexian soldier named Krush, whose avian features suggested he should understand hunting. They returned 6 hours later with 2 kills, both smaller than Webb's first but still representing significant food. Krush was vibrating with excitement, his feathers puffed up in patterns that meant pride. I killed it, Krush announced to anyone listening. With a spear. I calculated the trajectory, accounted for wind resistance, predicted the movement pattern, and struck precisely. You missed 3 times and got lucky on the 4th throw, Webb said. Tactical patience followed by decisive action, if that's what you want to call it. More soldiers volunteered for hunting parties. The camp's food situation transformed from desperate to sustainable within a week. The jungle that had seemed like an impenetrable death trap became a resource. Soldiers who had trained exclusively in high-tech warfare found themselves learning to read tracks, to move silently, to think like predators. Vexthor watched this transformation with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was being systematically dismantled. His military education, his decades of experience, his fundamental understanding of warfare had not prepared him for the sight of his soldiers successfully hunting megafauna with pointed sticks. "This shouldn't work," he said to Lieutenant Kix, as they watched another hunting party return with meat. "Yet it does, sir. We're coalition military. We use plasma weapons, tactical drones, orbital support. We don't," he gestured helplessly at a soldier sharpening a spear, "we don't make primitive weapons and hunt like savages." "With respect, Commander, perhaps the savages knew something we forgot." "What's that?" "That technology is wonderful until it breaks. Then you need to know how to actually do things." The hunting parties became almost routine. Soldiers learned which creatures were easy prey and which should be avoided. They learned to work together, to coordinate attacks, to use the terrain. The humans called it persistence hunting, and explained that their species had literally run animals to death on their homeworld through sheer stubborn endurance. "You chased animals until they collapsed from exhaustion?" Krush asked, horrified and fascinated. "Humans are pursuit predators," Webb explained. "We're not fast, but we don't stop. We just keep coming, hour after hour, until the prey physically can't run anymore. Then we walk up and stab it. That's terrifying. That's Tuesday. Your species flies, so you dive bomb prey. My species jogs at them menacingly for 8 hours. Different approaches, same result." By the third week, the camp had a surplus of food. They'd constructed smoking racks to preserve meat. The initial 17 plasma rifles sat mostly unused while soldiers carried spears everywhere. Some had started decorating their weapons with carvings or trophies, which Vexthor chose to ignore because morale was excellent and nobody was starving. Then the rescue fleet arrived. Admiral Grexnor's flagship descended through the atmosphere, expecting to find desperate survivors clinging to life, possibly fighting off predators, definitely grateful for rescue. Instead, her sensors detected organized structures, multiple heat signatures from cooking fires, and a defensive perimeter that looked almost comfortable. The landing party found Commander Vexthor waiting at the edge of the compound, standing next to a human who was casually sharpening a spear. "Commander, report," Grexnor demanded, her 4 eyes scanning the scene with confusion. "Admiral, welcome. All 203 survivors present and accounted for. We have adequate food supplies, no serious injuries, and morale is surprisingly excellent." "Food supplies? Our projections indicated you'd be near starvation." "We've been hunting, Admiral." Grexnor noticed the spear in Webb's hands, then noticed that several soldiers in view were carrying similar weapons. "Hunting? With those?" "Yes, Admiral." "Where are your plasma rifles?" "Maintaining perimeter security as protocol demands, so you hunted dangerous fauna with primitive weapons." "It seemed preferable to starving, Admiral." Grexnor walked through the camp, her confusion growing with each step. Soldiers looked healthy, well-fed, almost relaxed. The compound was organized efficiently. Smoking racks held strips of meat. A pile of spears sat near what appeared to be a training area. This wasn't a desperate survival situation. This was a functioning community. She found Webb teaching 3 soldiers the finer points of spear balance. "You're the human." "Yes, ma'am. You taught them this." "Seemed useful, ma'am." "You constructed primitive weapons and hunted predators to feed 200 soldiers." "Well, I wasn't the only one hunting after the first few days." Lots of folks helped. Grexnor stared at the spear, at the human, at the impossible situation. Soldier coalition doctrine states that proper weapons are required for engagement with hostile fauna. Sure, Webb agreed. These are proper weapons though. Just old school proper. They're sharpened rocks on sticks. Very effective sharpened rocks on sticks, ma'am. Got a pretty impressive success rate. She wanted to argue, to cite regulations, to explain why this shouldn't have worked. But the evidence was overwhelming. The compound thrived. The soldiers had not only survived but adapted. And it had all started with a human making a spear, because that's apparently what humans did when technology failed them. "When can you evacuate us, Admiral?" Vextor asked. "We can begin immediately. Have your soldiers gather their gear." "About that, Admiral." Vextor looked uncomfortable. "Several soldiers have requested time to finish smoking meat. They'd prefer not to waste the kills from this morning's hunt. You want to delay evacuation to smoke meat? They worked hard for those kills, Admiral. Seems wrong to abandon the food." Grexnor closed her eyes and counted to 10 in 3 languages. "Fine, 24 hours. Then we're leaving this planet." The evacuation, when it finally happened, included approximately 200 kilos of smoked meat and 57 handcrafted spears that soldiers absolutely refused to leave behind. Webb's original spear, the one that started everything, had been claimed by the camp as a collective trophy and was mounted prominently in the transport ship's common area. The journey back to civilization was unusual in that several soldiers spent their free time practicing with spears in the cargo bay, much to the confusion of the ship's crew. Vextor filed his after-action report with a sense of surreal acceptance, knowing that someone at headquarters would read about soldiers hunting with primitive weapons and assume he'd suffered a traumatic brain injury. 3 months later, Coalition Special Forces quietly added a course on primitive weapons and survival hunting to their training curriculum. They didn't advertise this change, and they certainly didn't explain that the course was developed because a human had proven that sometimes the best weapon was one you could make from a stick and a rock. Webb, for his part, received a commendation for creative problem-solving and adaptability under pressure. He accepted it with his characteristic lack of enthusiasm, suggested that anyone could have done the same, and asked if he could keep one of the spears. They let him keep it. After all, regulations stated that soldiers must maintain their weapons in proper working order, and as it turned out, a sharpened rock tied to a stick worked just fine.